4020.
Welcome to the podcast. It's back again. Does the Leeds episode count as the start of the season? I guess it does, because we were all there, sat in the Headingley Cafe, me, Phil, and some other people. And due to join us before Christmas, but couldn't because of a scheduling snafu, was Britain's leading Eddie-wearing impersonator since the death of Mike Yarwood. There's one for the teenagers. Jonathan Doidge. Why have you got David Lloyd's head behind you, Doidge? Doidge. Oh,
There you
Doidge.
go.
Oh.
Bumble live in 24 and 25.
And if I find a couple of tries, it doesn't mind a bit of rugby league, but as you're aware, he's a big Accrington and Stanley fan.
Someone's got to be, haven't they? How are you, Doidge? I mean, I saw you yesterday, so it's a silly question, but how are you?
Probably a little bit worse than yesterday, because if I start to suffer symptoms in the next couple of hours, then it will definitely be all down to using the same microphone as you on the Greyhound commentaries that we were subjected to during our working day yesterday. But yeah, all good, thanks. Yourselves?
Well, Phil, how are you?
Well, it's nice to know that having done an episode with 6 pale, male and stale journalists on last week at Headingley, we've now added to the list with yet another one. Yeah, well, we're nearly getting to the point where we can get excited about some meaningful rugby league, and we can tell some stories other than what might be happening at Salford and why we got the disciplinary procedure wrong.
I know you write bits of material for people, Phil. Do we know how we can get to Adam Hills? Because he's got to do an inauguration on his programme, hasn't he, on Friday? With his 2 vice president minions feeding him grapes or something.
Do you think they'll all be there at the Championship and League One launch on Thursday?
I don't know. Maybe he could rename things like his American counterpart.
I'll ask him if he's there.
Good stuff. What's happening, Phil? Well, Salford's happening, isn't it? And this is the ongoing war between some people and the media and the clubs and this and that and the other. And this seems to happen. I'm sure I said to Ian Watson every year at the season launch, well, you've had to do some firefighting. And now you say the same to Paul Rowley. And here we are again with the season barely weeks away, Phil.
Well, the question I was going to ask you, fine gentlemen, is what do you think the perception of rugby league is from the outside at the moment as we go into our 30th Super League season, which is a landmark. I know people have written books after just 10, so to get to 30 is quite amazing. But I mean, you're involved in the wider media. What are people talking about? Because I think we've just set the wrong agenda for the start of a season that could have some very exciting elements in it, like Las Vegas. Because, the Challenge Cup draw hasn't been great because it hasn't achieved what we wanted it to achieve. The Salford scenario is sort of undermining, because however we apportion blame, what people outside of the sport will be talking about is it's the start of the season in 3 weeks, and one of the teams that's supposed to be an elite team might not be able to come to the table in the format we'd like them to. And then the whole disciplinary thing, I just can't follow. That there hasn't been an official announcement that the system's changing, but we now make an announcement that the system that's changing that we haven't told you about isn't quite right, because people have said, do you know what I mean? It's like, what are people outside the sport talking about? Not what we're talking about. And I suspect we have allowed them to get the wrong idea of who we are and what we are. And that's why, as media, we're always fighting the fires.
Are you going first, Rich, or me?
No, you can go first. You're our esteemed guest.
I know he was scraping the bottom of a barrel yesterday when he did ask me if I would turn up and do a bit with you tonight. I just think it's still very sad, isn't it? The number of times we've collectively beaten on drums to promote the sport in the ways that we try and do that. And obviously through the magazine and through the various publications that we've all worked for over the years, try and hold the powers that be to account with some serious questions. But to go into, as you say, just a short period before the start of a new campaign, when rightly or wrongly, and there'll be people from lower levels of the sport that may not necessarily agree with this, but when we champion Super League through the media, and then to have one of the clubs, and not just another, it's a club that has got a rich history, and it's been up there and challenging in recent seasons as well. To be going through this at the moment, once again, that I'm going to use that expression of shooting ourselves in the foot as a sport. The disciplinary thing is another thing altogether, but again, it kind of just smacks of organizational issues, doesn't it? I mean, I'd just give you the job, Phil. It's in your blood. You talk sense all the time. Surely you can go and sort that out, and you don't need to write about it in a magazine or talk about it on this podcast, because it just needs action, doesn't it? And
I think
it's one step forward and 1.5, 2 back. So many times we've seen it. I mean, think about the World Cup and what happened with that situation as well. It sort of defies belief, doesn't it, at times?
I just think that there's an easy target in always blaming the RFL, and there clearly is some degree of culpability when it comes to something like the disciplinary, because clearly Warrington have their media day, and the first question that Sam Burgess is asked is, what do you think of the new disciplinary system? And the headlines coming out of the media day is Burgess asked for the disciplinary system to be changed. The next thing there's a press release via the governing body saying we're still looking at the disciplinary. So I mean, that is something that is completely within our control. But my worry is what we can always talk about that. It's news for us. It's perfect fodder for either social media or newspapers. That's fine. But what does it say about us from the outside looking in? And I think again that the whole of the Salford thing is clearly, it's not just about what's happening now. It's cumulative. It goes back to probably the time when Marwan Kukash withdrew his money, having overspent, and left them with about £5 million of debt that they were never going to clear. So you can talk about all the reasons as to why it's happening, but the fact is it's happening that often that it's almost like a rug being pulled from under the coaches at the start of every season. But this is a club that made the playoffs last year, that we lauded and saying this is what our competition can do, that with the right coaching, and it does, with the players that can be highly motivated, this is a great story, and they've got great crowds for the playoffs, and it's a launch pad for what we all hope that Salford can be. And what's happening is not a surprise to us. It's just that the timing of it happening again is it just makes everybody's job who wants to promote the sport so difficult. I would say also the Challenge Cup has not been handled desperately well on a couple of fronts. One is I don't know of any cup competition that has such a convoluted draw that it takes 25 minutes with 78 clubs. Why did we have to have the third round draw if there'd been a delay in completing the first round because of the weather? Why if we're going to have a seeded draw to make sure that Super League clubs go to Championship clubs with the laudable aim of putting money into the coffers of Championship clubs, do we not seed the draw fully so that 3 Super League clubs are in danger of playing community clubs, which has a massive duty of care issue over it, but also is going to show some extraordinarily high scores, because you're talking about essentially guys who play for the fun of playing against full-time professionals, which doesn't happen to the same degree in any other sport where there's physical contacts involved. What good will that do us? Why did we not ensure that if it was Super League clubs going to Championship clubs, that couldn't happen? Or why did nobody look at the idea that maybe the Super League clubs shouldn't come in around earlier? They should wait until the community clubs aren't in the competition anymore before they become involved, and then seed it. It's almost like we're fighting our own fires, but from the outside, we just don't look great.
Well, the Challenge Cup draw appears to be one of those examples of people have moaned for years that everyone should come in round 1, because that's how it used to be a million years ago, when there weren't as many community clubs or amateur clubs or the army or whatever in the competition, because that's a relatively new phenomena. And now they've realised, actually, it's not that great an idea, because Leeds might put 100 points past the army or whatever.
But it doesn't work from the point of view of the Super League clubs either, because they deliberately pared back their pre-season friendlies this year because they knew there was one round of the Challenge Cup to come before Super League kicked off. So if you're assuming, let's just say, oh, you might be going to Odsal, like Castleford probably will be, that's a good test. That's a real proper test for us. So obviously we'll build our pre-season around maybe having a game the week before for somebody's testimonial. We'll play our full first team in the first round that we're involved in the Challenge Cup, and that'll take us into the Super League season. What do you do now if you're St Helens and you're due to play an amateur club and you've only got Morgan Knowles' testimonial as your main run-out game? Who do you play against that amateur club? Do you want to risk Johnny Lomax getting injured in a game that you could win by predominantly putting out your academy team? What does that mean about the combinations that you're going to have when you go into Super League? And, what if Johnny Lomax missed most of the season because he got injured in that game, which was one that you were going to win anyway? It's like it doesn't make sense for anybody.
No.
I mean, we almost said that last year
Yeah,
with Wakefield, didn't we? And did they play Hunslet Amateurs in the Challenge Cup and Newcastle and Barrow in the 1895? No disrespect to either team, but instead of having friendlies before the season, well, they had one against Wigan that was called off after the floodlights. Right? Floodlight failures must be a thing in West Yorkshire these days. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, it's not an exciting new format at all, is it? And we said this at the time. It's just putting teams in and around earlier, and we'll get what we get. Although it has to be said that I did enjoy watching the Waterhead game against who were they playing? I can't remember. But Waterhead won anyway, and they'll play Fev in the next round because it seems now if ever Danny Capreme off of the telly and Matt Newsom also from the telly are together on the commentary, and they were very good by the way. But the draw because it seems to be a thing that happens with those two. So there's a little punting pointer for you next time they're together on the telly.
Okay.
Lee Miners.
Noted.
Lee Miners, that was it. It's great we still got that teams called Miners in 2025, but there you go.
Tradition,
Yeah,
Rich.
tradition. Dogs. There were loads of dogs by the pitch side. Eddie would have loved the dogs. Dogs everywhere. Ray French wouldn't have not loved the dogs.
What we need is an invalid vehicle on the touchline. We don't get enough of them anymore.
The ones used to get at Chelsea in the 70s. They also park them behind the goals. They don't need to nostalgia.
Have I joined Kenneth Williams and Frankie Howard here on the 4020 podcast this week?
You've joined Stadler and Waldorf.
The very best of the Muppets.
But look, I mean, just to sort of sum up that first bit when we're talking about Salford, the Challenge Cup draw, and whatever else it was that we were talking about, short-term memory's gone. Oh, the disciplinary. I mean, I've just seen the, dare I say it on a 4020 podcast, the Trump inauguration. What the markets need and all of that around the world is certainty, isn't it? That's what they love. And economies thrive in times that are more certain. And I think what it says about the sport in the first few minutes of this podcast is that there's still always that ongoing element of uncertainty. And just when you might be getting towards certainty, something uncertain happens again. And it just doesn't breed confidence in attracting outside support, really. I mean, support within, there'll always be that, bedrock of a fan base for the game because it's just a culture. You're going to slap me across the face here, Mr. Kaplan, for saying this, but it's a culture that has thrived in our part of the world, shall we say, without using any H words or anything like that. And so, we just need to be driven forward with certainty. And I don't know, but when have we really had that?
There's always going to be things that are outside of your control, and club finances clearly is one of them. This isn't a surprise at Salford because it's about the fourth or fifth time that it's been an issue in recent times. My argument is that all of these three things added together are of our own making. So, yeah, if somebody had written an article in the Times saying it's the start of the Super League season, what a waste of time this sport is, we would have all rallied round and gone, you can't say that. But though I'm merely highlighting those three issues to say sometimes we are our own worst enemy. And that's not those of us necessarily that want to promote the sport and highlight its best lights. We'll find stories to do that. And one to come on to in a minute is potential investment in London. But I just think sometimes we go to launches of the new season all with one hand tied behind our back. And my point of bringing it up wasn't to apportion blame or to say, how do we get into this and who's responsible for it and how, what's the solution? Because sometimes there aren't solutions. But the point I was trying to make was the perception from the outside. When Eddie Hearn says rugby league's a dying sport, it's a trite line because he's used it before. A, it's never going to die, and B, if he wants personalities, we've got them coming out our ears. But he might be right in that we don't know how best to use them. But it's not that we don't have any. It's also, I think he does say some stuff that's interesting about ceding power and control, which is what he wanted if he was going to get involved in the sport. And I think some of the issues we may or may not have with IMG is that same issue, that you can come up with any suggestions that you want to further the sport, but if the people aren't prepared to do it, who run the sport and own the sport more than run it, then all you are doing is taking your money for making suggestions, which is self-defeating ultimately. But I do think that the point of chatting about that for a quarter of an hour or so is just so that we can realise that sometimes how we see ourselves is not how others see ourselves, and how others see us is based on the fact that some of the things we've just talked about are agendas that we're setting for them. And that's a shame.
It's a shame Salford can't. Oh, sorry, go on, Doidge.
Well, I was just going to say, and after all of that, as we've said in numerous press boxes and car journeys and phone calls and whatever over the years, the players still are the ones on the field who keep coming up with the product and driving the game forward, and whatever happens off it, and you can have all those arguments about whatever you think, folks, in terms of management or mismanagement and all of that. The players just keep on coming, don't they, and keep producing the goods on the field and keep producing an entertaining spectacle, and and God, we've got them.
I think there's another factor to add into this, which is something we've all talked about. And again, has reared its head with Sam Burgess saying it. So obviously it must be a topic that we need to take.
He runs Rugby League, I understand.
Sometimes I wish he did, but he
cynic, sure, right.
Well, has said that we need to lose loot fixtures and we need scarcity. And you go, right, well, okay, well, why is he now saying that? And yet again, is it sort of on the agenda? Well, there were two friendlies this weekend. Warrington played Widnes. That was the one that he was involved with. 3,500 people turned up to basically watch Warrington's reserve team for most of the game play Widnes. 3,500 people because they haven't played each other for 6 years. Oldham played a Wigan team that again had a sprinkling of first team players, but was predominantly the guys that are probably going to be outside their starting 17. 3,000 people turned up, the biggest crowd for 20 years old. If we get it right, and if we get them, the competitiveness of those games right, and we give people a spectacle that they haven't seen for a while, and we give them a lot of stories around the game, Oldham on the up, and Matty Pete having a very close relationship with Sean Long and wanting him to do well, and obviously Sam Burgess, his new team is sort of out there with some of the new signings, and Widnes, are they going to be challenging in a championship that looks really competitive and open this year? We have the answers to some of the issues that are debated over and over and over again within our own control, and sometimes it's the inability to see it from our perspective that is the most frustrating when you're as old as I am.
Well done to Castleford as well for beating a made-up team. Well done to them. Salford shouldn't have gone on that warm weather training trip, should they? Having begged for money, that was poor optics.
Sorry, did I just hear a Wakefield fan say well done to Castleford? Can we clip that up, Phil, and keep that one? Just play it on loop. I
like Castleford. It's Huddersfield I don't like. This has been well established. Castleford are fine. It's all exciting. The thing that I took away from the Leeds launch, Phil, and this is a bizarre thing to take away because we're talking about personalities and stuff. That Jack Sinfield, Mikolaj Alenski double act there's something there. It might not be anything. It might not be anything at all. But there's the genesis of an idea. We could get them doing stuff and see if it works or not. But they've both got interesting personalities. They both play off each other well. Let's get them making some daft videos of something.
Anything like that. I mean, I don't understand the social media of da youth. I can never work out from one day to the next whether TikTok is a good thing or a bad thing. I think it depends which president's being inaugurated. But yeah, anything like that is character driven, go for it. We've got tons of personalities at every club.
What are you looking forward to?
You didn't understand the youth in your own youth.
I've still got the clothes of my youth and they fit me.
Slalom.
I'm saying nothing about that.
It's that slalom lager jumper. It's the best one. That should be in the Rugby League Museum. Oh, no. Yeah, no. Salford or Huddersfield, but without a rich owner, aren't they? Because they both need to improve their crowds somehow. Both play in good rugby. Both have had levels of success in recent years, but for some reason they can't get people through the door, and that's the big mystery. How do they do that? I don't know.
Well, I think Huddersfield at least are doing something, because the plan of Ken Davies to buy and renovate the Shea, even if that's only a short-term measure, which he keeps saying it will be, and good luck to him. And if he finds a site on Leeds Road in Huddersfield, and there's the will and the desire and the money to effectively build that as well as renovate the Shea, fantastic. But at least I think if Huddersfield do go into a smaller stadium, even in the short term, before they build a smaller stadium in the long term, that looks better and attracts people to come than a small crowd in a large tin that rattles around. So at least they're doing something. I think Salford's issue is, again, one of investment. Are they going to? Apparently, the investors that they're talking to, they've been in discussions with for anything up to a year, depending on who you believe. Now, one of the things, I don't know the detail, and I'm not a news journalist, and there are plenty of people out there that are giving us the detail who are news journalists. But I think there is a historic debt with Salford of £5 million, which goes back to, I think, the Kukash era, when he handed over the club to a fans cooperative. But that was what was in there. Now, I think 3 million of that 5 million is to the council. And I think one of the issues of the council not being able to sign a deal with the club now that the stadium is under their ownership is the fact that it's very hard to offer incentives and be owed £3 million. It's a double side of the same coin. It's also very hard for accounts to effectively rule out £3 million worth of debt when councils are in real trouble at the moment. So I can see there are some issues there. But what's an investor buying? If they're just buying historic debt, how do they get that debt paid back? Well, there's only two ways. One is you get a bigger television contract. That isn't going to happen in the near future. Or you get more people through the door. How do you get more people through the door? You play the kind of rugby that Salford were playing at the back end of last year, make the playoffs, get to finals. How can you do that if you're selling all your best players to pay off that? It's like the most ridiculous, vicious circle. And clearly I'm not clever enough to know how that gets broken. What I do think is interesting and probably worth talking about is an Australian consortium that may well be led by Brisbane Broncos buying London Broncos, which again, those of us of a certain age go, have we not had that press release before?
Yeah.
About 1994. But the fact that they're still interested in a vastly changed sporting landscape, when, as we've written in the current issue of the magazine, how do you get to NRL Atlantic now that we've already achieved, or we haven't, they have achieved NRL Pacific? Where do you start buying into our competition? Because they're not going to want it as it all exists at the moment. Well, you start by saying, well, London is a very strategic property. London at the moment is probably the best investment you'll make because its value is the lowest it will be being in the Championship and not having any debt whatsoever, because David Hughes has walked away, leaving them debt free. If the NRL stroke, ARLC have got designs on any part of the Super League product, now's a very good time to get in very early to buy it, in the knowledge that they would probably value a team in the capital more than we ever have. So I think that's quite exciting and fits into a broader narrative that includes things like Las Vegas and You know, the story about the NRL wanting to buy into Super League is not going away. Is this the first shot across the bows of making that happen? Whether it is or it isn't, that's a really positive story. And the fact that Gary Hetherington's broker in it is a great news angle.
Not Gary. Yeah, never the man for the opportunity. I tell you what, he's taken some good ones though down the years. I think, yeah, it's got to be very positive news, hasn't it, if there's interest from down there, because, you know, I'm going to throw in the widening of the gap and all those sorts of things, and if we get some interest from there, yeah, clearly it's going to take probably a long time. If we're going to be talking, there's going to be more interest maybe throughout the competition and not just one club. But it's got to start somewhere, hasn't it? And we're kind of drifting like the Kon-Tiki, and they've got the rudder very firmly in place, and are just continuing to go from strength to strength. So yeah, really interesting to hear that. Just remind me, because I do remember the Broncos thing coming up back in whenever it was, 94, you said, but around about that time, innit? It was just when the tensions were kind of being nudged towards the Super League era.
Which again was led by Brisbane Broncos.
Yeah, where did it go that? Did Super League kill it or what?
No, I think what we got was the best London Broncos team we've ever had, because we got Tony Curry drafted in as the coach. We got a second place finish in Super League. We got
Terry Matterson.
He'd left a trip to Wembley. We got some signings over here that were linked to the Brisbane Broncos of the past, people like Terry Matterson. And I just think it worked. That World Club Championship that was hugely derided in '97, the Broncos were probably the only team that actually managed to get positive press out of and big crowds down there at the Stoop. So it did work. And then Richard Branson came in and I think bought their share and put Virgin on the front. And then he lasted as long as a major entrepreneur who wears jeans and leads his team out at Wembley can be expected to last in our fine sport. And then all of a sudden it went downhill from there. But I do think that it's a win-win for everybody the more you think about it, because clearly somebody like, for example, Kai Pearce-Paul is opening some eyes at Newcastle. And when they say, oh, yeah, we signed him from Wigan, and then look into his backstory and probably hear his accent and think he was a kid that came through a system that, was almost in spite of rather than because of, but got into the London Broncos first team, got talent spotted, so good he's now holding his own in the NRL, and I think he's going to go to open market because he's going to get offered a really good deal the next time round. And so Brisbane can say, well, if there's more kids like that floating around, we only need a couple to come over and play for us, and that's our development job done. By the same token, we've got all these kids that we could ship out to Queensland Cup sides, but we want to see, whether our young halfback that's playing with North Devils could actually take on Harry Smith at Wigan. We want to see that. We want to see him under pressure every week. The Queensland Cup is an environment that they know. That's where we're picking them up from. Let's put them in a competition that's of a higher standard, and let's see really what they're made of. It would work for everybody. I think Rowan Smith, who I think his great strength is identification and development and giving opportunity to talent. He's back at North Devils, and they are, I believe, one of the feeder teams for Brisbane Broncos. You can see why if Gary Hetherington's involved, Rowan Smith's on the outer of it. Brisbane want to get into junior development where there isn't any at the moment, and it wouldn't cost them that much to do it. It's sort of a win-win for everybody. And if you really want to extrapolate that into the realms of fantasy, which is where I live, at the top of an ivory tower, I can see that what Wigan and Warrington are doing in Las Vegas, what London might be doing with Brisbane, there's links that you can see that this is developing. In the NRL want 2 conferences of 10. Now, it might be 2030 by the time they get there, but we already know that PNG jigsaw piece is in there. Perth is not far away from being signed, I'm told. New Zealand is the preferred option for the 20th piece. They want 2 conferences of 10, less games, more intensity, more windows for representative and international matches. You can see that somebody over there who's looking at expansion is saying, conferences tend to start within the Northern Hemisphere with our fingerprints all over it and our selling, corporate jerseys and taking a state of origin game into London and all that kind of thing that people who have strategy should be talking about, short, medium, and long, sort of makes sense. So you're looking at maybe 10 clubs jostling to be in that conference. All of a sudden, London have got a leg up if Brisbane Broncos are part of them. As I say, there's no evidence to back this up, but you can see a picture emerging if you really want to look for it.
Stop it now. I mean, I've already just gone out and bought my celebratory. I've ordered my celebratory photograph of when Great Britain or England win a World Cup, because that's what it's all about ultimately. But it is, isn't it? I mean, this what we're talking about here. We're talking about clubs, but ultimately it would have to be. I can't see any other. Well, yeah, you can see why they'd want clubs to thrive, but it would be about the international game, because
I think
how many times have we argued about that? Get the international competition right, that the ultimate marketing window for your sport, and they've got to do something on that front.
Well, why are nations like South Africa bidding to host our men's and women's World Cup? Now, again, it may be too early for them. Why is the NRL has invested in the board of USA Rugby League? I don't think, and we've talked about this on the program before, that there's going to be an elite professional competition in America anytime soon, because I just don't think it works like that. You can't build a sport. Football will tell you that. Rugby union will tell you that. We've had that conversation between us loads of times. What you can do, if you're ever going to put domestic teams in these places at an elite level that will build the international game, that comes under the Northern Hemisphere brief. The RFL are never going to best exploit whatever rugby league interest there is in South Africa, even if that means one professional club and a nation that then does have a credible bid for a World Cup. But the NRL can, and they can sell jerseys there. It's a rugby nation. It's the same with America and Canada. We probably do need to revisit the positives of Toronto, not the financial model, but the fact that you can get 10,000 fans supporting a team who, is not endemic to its region. If you promote it right, if you put it in an elite competition, if you're not prepared to put barriers there to prevent them playing in it, but you actually want to embrace them, well, all of a sudden you're looking at NRL Atlantic that could embrace all of that, but has a massive spin-off for the international game.
Is this all in the latest 4020 magazine out now?
Funnily enough, a lot of it is.
It was NRL Europe, but now you've expanded to take on the whole of the Atlantic, like President Trump taking over Greenland. This is the idea. This is.
Well, it's not my idea. It's the fact that if you're serious about being a global sport, and let's face it, the only thing that both hemispheres need is a better television deal than the one they've got at the moment. And certainly that the NRL have to go some to get a better deal than they've got at the moment, because the one they've got at the moment is pretty brilliant. But what you have to offer is something very different and a global perspective on what you are and who you are. There's no shame in going back to being a semi-professional part-time sport elite level over here. Don't expect any money for it from any broadcaster. But if you want to still have your Sky subscriptions, if you still want to be available to Americans to watch the NRL, even if they don't fully understand who the teams are, but they're following the personalities that play for those teams, then you have to have this kind of thinking, I think, and you have to be global. Now, the only way you're going to be global is if it's in the magazine and you've just mentioned it. In 2023, NRL Europe seemed like a really good idea. Now in 2025, NRL Atlantic seems like a better idea to achieve that, because by virtue of them putting money into the Pacific with not just the PNG team, but they're putting money into development in Tonga and Samoa and Fiji, they already now have, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, NRL Pacific.
Which reminds me, before we get cut off, we need to get you in the studio, Doidge, because we need to do the official Phil and Jonathan's reminiscence of the 2000 World Cup, even not the 2020 World Cup, the 2000 World Cup, because it's 25 years on. You must have lots of stories to tell about the great times of Rugby League's greatest ever international tournament.
I'll tell you what, first and foremost, that is scary. That's 25 years ago. I will never forget that. Well, maybe we should just do it another time, but I'll just mention the one thing. I remember when we went to the match at the Millennium Stadium and the doubleheader that Sunday, Phil, and it was raining. Obviously, it rained for the entire tournament, didn't it? From just before the first ball was kicked to just after the last one, incessantly. But it was horrendous there. The roof was already moved into place because of the rain, and there was a leak right in the middle of the roof over the centre spot, and it was just like a waterfall from there throughout the entire match, just running down onto the pitch. I'm guessing that, on another day they might have decided that that wasn't on, but it was a World Cup game, and so let's just crack on. New Zealand against Lebanon. Wales, was it? Oh God, yeah, New Zealand, Wales on it. Lebanon against Cook Islands, I think, on the double header. Yeah.
Hazem El Masri gave the greatest ever press conference, but we can come back to that.
Where can we find you and Mr. Bumble, Mr. Doidge?
Does that poster? No, it doesn't tell you, does it? Sorry, folks. I've got a massive poster with all the dates on. You can find us. The venues that are not yet sold out are Honley Cricket Club, which I believe is going on for being sold out. Bardsey in Leeds, Bardsey Cricket Club, which is on the Weatherby side of Leeds. I think they're still selling. And the last of the lot, I don't even know if they've put tickets on sale yet. Richmondshire CC up near Catterick Garrison. Excellent. Doing one with Anthony McGrath as well, by the way, the Yorkshire cricket head coach. I've just been out for a coffee, interestingly, with Damien McGrath this afternoon. His eldest brother, who of course was formerly a player with Swinton, and who?
Assistant coach with Graham Murray.
Yeah.